Well, good afternoon. I'm going to welcome you to the third panel and final panel of this wonderful day. And I wanted to briefly shout out to Anisha Sapp, who's been sitting outside and been helping us coordinate this event, and who's been reminding me to relax, everything's going fine, and I should swing and flow a little bit more. So here's out to Anisha. And I'm going to say a few things. So DJ Spooky arrived, and he just did a violin test with Sandy Poindexter, and it's all working, so we're all excited about that coming around. And our next panel is going to be about locating the daily practice of inclusion. The key question that I'm with right now after this wonderful day is, how do we validate each other's activities? How do we validate each other's ambitions? How do we validate each other's hopes instead of letting others validate them for us? The power really is in us validating each other mutually. And so that brings us to the topic of locating where do the daily practices of inclusion take place, what do they look like, and how do the difficult spaces of inclusion feel if things aren't going as planned. And we have some wonderful panelists to discuss this today, and Reggie Royston is going to chair the department. So please welcome Reggie and our wonderful panelists.
Can you turn it
Hi.
off when we're not actually using it?
Okay, hi. Again, my name is Reggie Royston, Department of African American Studies here in the Center for New Media. I'll start with our panelists from, I guess this is my right here. J.R. Richardson, right? Val Ray. Okay, J.R. I just know him as J.R. Block Report Radio, which is syndicated internationally through KPFA, Pacifica Radio station, widely known community media activist, major conduit for us here in the Bay Area. Ryan Shelby, Department of Engineering, and let's see, Ryan has some very interesting projects through CARES is the name of his program, Sustainable Energy, that he'll get into. Soraya Murray at UC Santa Cruz.
She's not here.
She's not here? Okay. But we have Jennifer Gonzalez, right? Okay. And I'm very looking forward to your presentation and your take on this idea of daily practices of inclusion. And Asha Richardson, another radio advocate from Youth Radio here. So I'll start with the first question. What experiences did you have in the field, be they a gallery, reservation, academic environment, that illustrate the difficulties or rewards of inclusion? What experiences in your respective fields do you have in terms of illustrate in terms of the difficulties and rewards of inclusion? And I'll start with Asha Richardson. So we'll hear a new voice from over there.
So at Youth Radio, I helped start, and I was like the lead young person, and I've gone through the program. We started a app development department, making apps around community engagement. And when I think about illustrating difficulties with inclusion, I think about one aspect of our department, which is we have a speaker series. And unlike having, a keynote speaker that would come and talk at you, we sit around a table with people from various positions in the tech industry, and then we just have a conversation. And we get to ask them about what it is that they actually do. And a lot of these computer programmers are also interested in making music and making beats and interested in video and pop culture and have bands. And they're not just, what you would think of like the 1995 nerd on a computer and doesn't know how to talk to anybody or anything like that. They're complete people, and it demystifies what it means to be a part of the tech industry or be a programmer. And it's made it easier for young people to want to engage and want to develop these tools. And on a personal note, like being around technology all of my life, when I went to college, I'm in college still, or at Mills, I wasn't interested in pursuing an interest in computer science because I felt like, I don't really want to do that. That's boring, But I realized it was because I was nervous about being a part of something that I thought was going to be technically remarkably difficult. But being a part of that app lab and doing these things on a smaller scale around a table with grad students from Cal and Stanford, it's actually made me more interested. So I think that it's important to know what these different communities look like, and for young people to be engaged in what that looks like and demystify, oh, that's something you can't be a part of. Because then people will change maybe or develop what their interests are.
All right, thank you. Next hear from Professor Gonzalez.
Okay.
Inclusion.
Yeah.
Oh.
I think that we need to, with the word inclusion, and this was brought up a little earlier, there's a kind of almost hint of charitable non-inclusion in the word, and I like the shift to the notion of equality. But let's stick with inclusion for a minute. I was thinking about my own experience with non-inclusion. That is, I grew up in a working class home. We had 800 square feet. It was a little shotgun Mexican barrio house. But my parents had an education, so I was able to do some things that my cousins couldn't do. Like imagine going to college even though we didn't have any money and stuff like that. And my dad was an artist, so that made him a little different and so on. So, but I was an outsider in a lot of ways because I wasn't white and but I was light-skinned, so I could do various kinds of passing. So there's a lot of ways in which in one lifetime you can be excluded and then included and then excluded and then included. And at my undergraduate institution, I was excluded for being a woman with a lot of big black hair, wearing punk clothes in a philosophy department. There's all kinds of ways in which you can be an outsider and yet be an insider because I was at this elite college because I was a nerd and I'd studied in high school. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is the way in which there isn't a simple way to consider the boundaries of inclusion and exclusion, but that these are kind of morphing conditions for any subject, and that we consider the way in which in that change over time, now I'm a professor and I'm teaching students who remind me of myself in college, and I'm bringing them a different conversation than the one I was able to hear, because no one was teaching Chicano art or activist art or feminist art when I was taking classes in art history and philosophy and so forth. I was being given a very European canon. So I would say what I did as an academic and a thinker was to say, how do I include different material in the academy than what's already there? And I think that's a really important radical gesture, even if it's within the academy. So we have to think about not only who belongs in the way they look, but also what belongs in terms of curriculum and what stories get told and so forth. So that's just a really mini view of the arc of my life in relationship to institutions. And so I'll stop there.
Yeah. And could you also say, being a professor on staff, right? Difficulties as well.
Oh, yeah. So, yes. What's interesting about being a professor who gets identified with a particular cultural group or racial group is that you are both expected to be representative, and a lot of us know all about that, but you're also not expected in some cases to be a certain kind of thinker. And this goes back to racism in general. That is, as a Latina in a field which is dominated by, particularly my field, which is visual studies or art history, and when people hear the word art history, they think, Impressionism or something like that. I'm read in a very specific kind of way, and I'm not expected to produce as intelligent a discourse as potentially my white counterpart. And so being in that situation in the university can sometimes be really oppressive, because then you feel like you really have to be articulate just to make up for the fact that people are going to expect you not to be articulate. So there's a lot of that, there's a lot of that can go on in the academy, and I think, so that's the downside. The upside is that in terms of inclusion, you suddenly can become, for students, a beacon for them, someone who can be sympathetic. Students come to me, and I look, with my hair all white like it is now, I don't look that Latina anymore in a lot of ways, but students come to me and they're really surprised to find out about how I grew up and how I got to where I am now, and that helps them think about possibilities. So I can be a site of inclusion for them in the context of the university, in a meeting in an office hours or something like that. So the gestures that I can make toward them allow them to imagine a possibility of attachment to or engagement with education, university life, and passing on the comment about engineering, which we'll hear about in a minute, is really critical. What if no people come after me and want to work on Chicano art or want to work on activist art? Who's going to teach that material to the next generation of students? So I feel like I need to be interesting to them and inspiring to them, so that's something they want to do.
Ryan, you're at the round of applause, I guess, for Professor Gonzalez. Ryan, science and technology has our attention as like nothing else does right now.
Sure.
And you are at UC Berkeley. The benefits and and pitfalls of inclusion as you see it from your perspective and in your work.
So again, I'm a PhD student here in mechanical engineering, and I think one of the biggest pitfalls when it comes down to inclusion in engineering is that, at least what I've seen here in the College of Engineering at UC Berkeley, is that I don't think that the powers that be see a role for inclusion at all in engineering. When we sit and think about engineering knowledge production and data manipulation in engineering, there are certain cultural norms and practices that we utilize here at Berkeley for going out and extracting data, for going out and manipulating the data, for going out and taking the data and applying it and sharing it around the world. And when you think about other knowledge production practices for engineering technology, if they don't match up with what's being taught here, you can see pushback from the powers that be, in this case, professors and administrations, for non-inclusion in this case. So for me, I do a lot of work with Native American tribes on designing energy-efficient buildings that take into account a lot of their social and cultural values, as well as meeting their framework for sustainability. Now at Berkeley, when we talk about sustainability, we always talk about greenhouse gas emissions, embedded carbon, or embedded water, or the carbon equivalency. But when you're out there partnering with these communities, their framework for sustainability revolves around, in this case, cultural sovereignty, tribal sovereignty, economic self-sufficiency, and environmental harmony. That's something that's not in our discourse. And what I've seen in my work here over the past 4 years, as my advisor can attest to, is that it can be somewhat difficult being able to take the tribe's framework for sustainability and justify it, if you will, to the other discourse that we have here at UC Berkeley. So it's a concern, because I don't know if we truly believe here at Berkeley if inclusion is as important in engineering. For me, I think it is, because it comes down to trying to deal with this groupthink in engineering knowledge production. Now, I'm from Alabama. I'm a farm boy from Alabama. Don't get me wrong, I happen to think we farm boys are pretty good people. I happen to think Southerners make some pretty darn good presidents too. Now, if you have a room full of engineers like me from Alabama, you're going to get an engineering solution that comes from this Alabama perspective, which is not necessarily bad, but if you're not taking into account all these different other ideas, you're not going to have this new influx of ideas and knowledge production. So I think inclusion is important in engineering just to address that issue, but I don't know if it's seen here at UC Berkeley or at other institutions around the world. And it's somewhat of a concern, because if you're not going out and not allowing and creating the pathways for students in other communities, in this case here the Native American tribes I'm working with, to do this work, you're missing out on this great source of knowledge. And moreover, a lot of times you'll end up designing technology that may meet a lot of technical specifications and may meet your social norms. But when you give it to people, either it doesn't meet their values and they don't adopt it, or they end up using it and it causes more harm than they're at right now. So I hope that kind of gets you a thing.
Interesting. It really expands the idea of what we mean by engineering in many ways, right? JR, I'm going to wrap the next question into it, and you can talk about, in conclusion, in your experiences with inclusion and whatnot, but also we have the idea that you started talking about with sovereignty. Once you're included or you're not excluded, or you are excluded, how do you deal with sovereignty in that regards? How do you maintain sovereignty, I guess, within the system or within the acceptable discourse, or how do you maintain sovereignty outside of that discourse is where I see it going.
How do we remain sovereign? One, we've been excluded for so long as black people from, as Cecil talked about earlier, from reading, which is one of the fundamental aspects of journalism. We've been excluded so long that, just like what we were talking about earlier about I don't get my validation from academia or UC Berkeley, we've been able to create our own sphere of people that I feel validate what I do, whether that be peers, elders like Black Panthers, and people who've done similar work for our community. We basically, to answer the question real short, is that because we was excluded from being a part of the mainstream discourse, we created our own communities. Now, the ramification is you got media monsters like me and Kevin Epps who really don't give a fuck what academia has to say. And it's because we've been forced to set up a parallel reality. Yes, we are all on this stage, and what's a trip even about me being on this stage today is San Francisco State. If I wanted to go to San Francisco State right now, I can't because I owe 2 classes in general ed. But I wrote a letter of recommendation for Pendarvis Harshaw, who was supposed to be on this panel. And he got in with my letter of recommendation. So I think what is very funny about it, and Kevin Epps said something about it before, is you talking about, this conference is talking about inclusion. Mm-hmm. The question to me isn't even inclusion, is how do you make enough noise where you can deal with people on your terms? And at this point, you know, I didn't ask to be a part of y'all conference. Y'all asked me. You know, so I'm just saying that to say, I think that we need to get more into doing cutting edge work, because the crowd will come when you do cutting edge work, because too many people aren't doing cutting edge work. So, you know, how do you maintain your sovereignty? You don't. I refuse to be assimilated. And I mean, as you guys keep saying, some people have mistermed what I've been saying as anti-intellectualism. That's not true. I educate myself. I read on my own. I have my own set book list of things that I come across and things that I need to be made aware of so that I can be a better journalist. That's very intellectual. It might be, it's anti-institutional. That would be the best way to say it. And also, it's more practical. The guidance that guides me is not about what a professor has to say. What guides me and validates me besides my community is, I'll take it from you guys, the scientific method, right? You have a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis, you come up with a resolution. Most of academia, specifically speaking about journalism, y'all don't have a laboratory. My laboratory is the community. So even at this conference, I just met 2 different women who I don't even really know that speak to me and critique and analyze what it is that I do. And to me, that's the laboratory. And so salute to those 2 women, because that's how I stay astute, and that's how I get the validation from my community. And to academia, I mean, I think, honestly, if you look at the news, big media is falling. Citizen journalism is on its way in. So, you know, you might not want to go to journalism school to be a journalist. You might want to just be one.
And the ethnic press is... And the ethnic press circulation is up. Ethnic press circulation is up, right? So what does that say? So maybe you can talk about maybe a little bit some of your stories. Let's talk about what we do. We talk about where we come from, some of our experiences. What do you do? Like some of your stories or maybe a project that you're involved in.
What do I do besides journalism?
Well, your product is what I'm saying.
Well, I do Black Report Radio. It's at blackreportradio.com. I see some of y'all got the laptops out. If y'all want to check it out, blackreportradio.com. I see it's called the Black Report because my target audience is the Black. Mm-hmm. Black and brown ghettos, barrios, internationally favelas, slums. And why do I take that position? Because I believe like Marcus Garvey, like Huey Newton, like Malcolm X, all journalists at one point or another in their lives, it's our responsibility to educate our community. Oppressor is not going to educate us on how to be free, practically.
And so some of your stories, like...
I'm about to get to that. I got to give you the context first.
Sure.
So, you know, so that's the framework from where I'm coming from. But we do talk to all different types of people. One of my most interesting stories that I liked recently, I dealt with Ebonics. And I talked to Dr. Ernie Smith, who's a linguist. And he broke it down on how the way Black people... First off, I didn't know that a language was not made up of the words it uses is made up by its grammatical structure. That's how language is defined. And so he went through the high science of linguistics and taught us a whole lot of that to justify his argument on Ebonics. And to be honest, when I started to interview him, I wasn't even totally sold on it. I wasn't even a Ebonics proponent, opponent, or proponent, right. I wasn't even pro-Ebonics. But by the time it ended, I felt that he had a very good case, and it better prepares my community to go into the world to intellectually fight the war of white supremacy and capitalism on the backs of black people.
Thank you. Ryan, tell us about your projects.
Sure. So as I alluded to before, I do a lot of work with Native American tribes, mainly in Northern California, on culture-inspired, energy-efficient building design. And one of the things that you have to realize early on is that the Native American communities in this country, and as well as other indigenous communities, they've got their own knowledge production mechanisms and methodologies for engineering. And here at Berkeley, we have our own methodologies and our own knowledge production system as well, too. So my work for the past 4 years has been focusing on the development of this co-design methodology that allows engineers trained in one knowledge base to partner with Native American communities trained in their knowledge base to come together to combine their collective intelligence to actually start creating designs that meet the target and user groups' social as well as cultural, economic, and environmental criteria. And that's what I've been doing for the past 4 years. And a lot of it's really coming back to some of your points, is that sometimes tribes can be framed as being anti-Western science, or that they're trying to not adopt Western culture and technologies. Well, that may be true in some sense. In the case what I've seen with this community here is that they're seeking to actually preserve their history and culture by utilizing the latest best practices and technologies available to them, as well as utilizing some of their historical and traditional approaches too. So it's not an either or, it's about being able to identify what's best for them. And my work has been focusing on allowing them, if you will, to give them an avenue so that they can put the forefront of this engineering design process their cultural values, if you will. And you asked before about sovereignty. In the case of this community here, sovereignty is a very big issue in Native American tribes. There's tribal political sovereignty, which is their relationship with these domestic dependent nations with the federal government. And there's also this concept of cultural sovereignty, where instead of just having the federal government just define what the tribe's powers are, cultural sovereignty takes the standpoint, well, what if you had your social and cultural norms as the key cornerstone or the primary influence in how you go about designing your community, how do you go about building infrastructure? So I spend a lot of times of being able to understand their culture and understand their criteria and their framework for sustainability, and utilizing that to actually start designing these renewable energy systems. And it's amazing how I'm seeing a lot of these connections with what you've been doing, what I've been doing here, because there's a lot of pushback, you see, because they have their own knowledge production mechanisms. Exactly. And because it may not exactly align up with what's taught in the current discourse here, they get, how should I say, disregarded at best, and at worst it gets demonized as saying, well, it's all cultural, so they must not know what we're talking about. So right. I spend a lot of times trying to prove to the guys here at Berkeley that the tribes do a lot of engineering work on their own. They may frame it in different contexts, but it's still engineering knowledge production.
So what is that? Can you give us an example? Like, what's the issue?
So, for example, here, when it came down to designing the homes, so we're building 4 of these energy-efficient, culture-inspired homes right now. When it came down to coming up with some of the designs for it, they actually drew a lot of images. They did a lot of artwork to talk about some of their traditional homes, and they sunk one of their homes in the ground, and that was odd to us. And when we started asking, well, why are you having your home sunk into the ground? Well, they'll talk about from their oral history of how having a home sunk into the ground, it really helped control the temperature inside. You know, Mother Earth would help heat and cool them over the year. And in my mind, you know, hey, that's ground source heat pumps, right? You know, when during the wintertime, the Earth's surface is much warmer than the atmosphere, and vice versa during the summertime. It's cooler in the ground than it is in the atmosphere. Just because the tribes aren't calling these things ground source heat pumps because they're relating it to Mother Earth doesn't mean it's not the same thing. So that's one concrete example of how they've done engineering knowledge production and design since time immemorial, but because it's not framed in what we talk about here at Berkeley, it can easily get discarded. I mean, there's others too, but I mean, that's just one really big concrete one for me.
Great. Okay. Maybe we can talk about more later. Professor Gonzalez.
Yeah, so I feel like my contributions are literally boring, but hopefully not. What I do as a scholar is I write and I publish. So those are my productions. And my productions are a way of thinking about how to read race differently in visual culture. So I write about online digital spaces and how racialized bodies show up there. And by the word racialized, I mean both stereotyped racialized bodies as well as self-representations in avatars and so forth. I'm really interested in online digital spaces and sort of what Anna Everett said earlier today, the question of racial tourism. So I have a whole set of publications that are about digital culture, digital space, and how racialized bodies appear there and disappear there. And I'm particularly avid as a scholar in trying to push back against the unending tide of white scholarship that wants to keep claiming now that the internet is a race-neutral space, right? So my scholarship has for a decade been precisely about critiquing that, probably 15 years, actually, if I think about it, right? So what surprises me, although it shouldn't, is that that scholarship continues, and there's a new generation of writers trying to say, oh, the internet, we can all finally get rid of race, and we don't have to look at each other anymore. And since we don't have to look at each other anymore, just think how we'll forget all about our cultural histories, and Mark Hansen. So anyway, scholars like that annoy me because they're so naive, and they're almost always white scholars, and they're almost always thinking they're saying something progressive, and they're actually repressing history and repressing knowledge and repressing forms of representation. So that's a lot of what my scholarship is about.
Can I follow you up on that one? So is the argument from what I've seen it's about tools, right? So it's not about...
No, it's about art.
Okay.
So it's about online spaces, two things. It's about artificial worlds and online spaces, so that could be read as a tool. That is popular spaces where people show up online. But it's also about artists, some of whom are doing what I think is progressive critical analysis of race online, and then some of whom are doing what I consider to be really regressive representations of race online.
Okay.
And I write about both in order to critique and show them to the public.
The erasure we're talking about, or the whitewashing of the interface, as Lisa Nakamura calls it, right? Can you expound on that a little bit? And I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it seems as if the new media scholarship that claims race is not on cyberspace anymore is an argument about tools, right? Well, there's no intentionality in the tools we've created, right?
Precisely. So there's this notion that somehow the tools are racially and culturally neutral, even though the tools come out of very specific communities. I think your example is a really good one in terms of engineering and architecture. This notion that a certain kind of design is, in fact, for a culture, very culturally specific, and it has all of these benefits that other cultures have recognized and called something else. But I think what happens when you're looking at online tools is there's this notion that somehow there's two qualities. One is that the tools are racially neutral when, in fact, we know where the tools have been developed and that those tools are not necessarily software designs that come out of community history or out of community identity. So that's one issue. And then for me, the other issue is the notion that somehow being online allows you to be outside of yourself. And we talked a little bit about, and Anna Everett talked a little bit about the notion that you can put on another skin. The gentleman here was talking about, oh, I'm going to be a tattooed lady for a while, and then it's going to get me some attention, and then I'm going to bring folks in that way, which I think is a great ploy. I mean, I'm not critiquing it, but what I am saying is there's this notion that that kind of passing somehow is fluid, when in fact people bring all of their racism and all of their identity and all of their baggage with them when they go online. And so when they decide as, like, for example, a young white woman to present herself as a black man online, that identity tourism that we were talking about, she has no identity. She has no idea what it's like to be a black man in the world, to be not picked up by taxis, to be denied housing, to have your very life threatened, right? That's not about cross-racial identification, and yet that is how it's presented. It's like, look, you can take on the skin of someone else in Second Life and see what it's like to be black. And that rhetoric is precisely the kind of thing that I am trying to critique.
Very interesting. So,
I just want to point out that Mark Hansen was listening, and in response to your comments,
good.
he took his photos off, and now they're broken links, you see.
Oh.
I don't know, I just looked him up, and there it is. His homepage, broken links, no identity.
Can I
So
just
the
say,
tools are
not everything he writes do I have a problem with, just that one aspect.
Asha, what's your take on it? There's obviously some very specific cultural production coming out of youth radio. How do you look at it as in terms of sovereignty, and what are some conventions that reflect your audience and your community?
So, as a college student, I feel like I have two schools. I have Mills College, and then I have my experiences at Youth Radio, and they're very different. I feel like my experience at Youth Radio has been a space of inclusion. For the App Lab, it's being included in a tech field where, as a black woman, I'm like a minority of minorities. And I guess the best way, and in the App Lab, we try to include all different types of communities. And I kind of mentioned that earlier, and I'll explain that now, if you don't mind, through one of the projects that we're doing called Forge City, which is an app that is accessing a large community of different types of people. We had some grad students from Cal School come and teach us the process of app development, and it's an app that's supposed to redistribute backyard fruit for free. And we want to, in the development of the app, we wanted to think about inclusion. So it's going to be on the iPhone, it's going to be on the Android, and we recently were like, okay, how are we going to have an app about food justice if there's not a web page? People, if you don't have access to healthy fruit in your neighborhood, we're assuming you have an iPhone, okay? So then we need a website as well. And then we're thinking, okay, why recreate the wheel? Why recreate this around, okay, food justice? We need to be including the leaders of farmers markets and food justice movements and foraging and urban farming. And so I think that project that we're working on is one of the best examples of a project that is including everybody, from the academia to people in the community. And for as far as sovereignty, and correct me if I'm misinterpreting this, when I think of sovereignty, I think of independence, and I think of my experience is valid, and not having my experience and my opinion changed by the new environments I have to interact with. So just making sure I'm using the word correctly.
Sure.
And for me, at Youth Radio, through the journalism I've done and with this app development, that's the place where my voice speaks the loudest. And I don't, instead of having to combat with classmates, we work together to, instead of, like we're always saying with Youth Radio, how they got started, instead of having a reporter come tell how young people feel, have young people talk about themselves and talk about their own stories. And so moving that into a different platform, what is important to you? Versus saying like, oh, I'm going to go download this, or, oh, there's a new feature on Facebook that'll let me do something. Why are you waiting for someone else? Get included, And maybe, I'm not sure if that's answering the question. I'm kind of having a little bit of difficulty with the word sovereignty. But that's what it means for me. It means for me that, and this other idea of connected learning, it means that what I'm learning at school and what I'm learning at Youth Radio are being connected to what I want to read when I'm at home, and how that's shifted, and how our young people come in and the discussion is changing throughout the semester of what they're interested in, and being like, oh no, you need to go read the news, you need to read tech blogs, you need to be trying these other things, but you also need to understand that your opinions are just as valid. Sure. So I hope that.
I want to open up to questions, but I think maybe we'll do one more round, just a quick. So here's something. I'm going to put you on the spot, and you can answer out of order, however you like. How would you, from the perspective of what you do, how would you deal with the issue of, since we're talking about equality, environmental racism? Okay. from the perspective of what you all do. You all have interventions, specific kind of interventions going towards equality. Maybe it's something you've dealt with in your work. How would you approach that? Sure.
That's a great question. Where I teach, there are people whose full-time job is to work on environmental racism, so I talk with them sometimes. And what I try to do when I do work on activist art and teach about activist art is that I definitely focus on different issues and concerns. And so as a teacher, I teach about environmental racism, and then I teach about artists who are trying to criticize the condition or bring attention to the condition or draw a kind of public consciousness to the condition. So that's one of the things that I do. So I teach about it, and then I teach works that sometimes are inclusive, solution-oriented types of artworks that are online.
Interesting. Any specific examples within that you can
I'm
name?
going to have to, I'm not going to be, I'm going to have to look it up for you, but
Okay.
I'm happy to send it around if people want.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Ryan, go ahead.
Sure. So recognizing that the tribes have their own approaches to doing engineering knowledge production, they're not the dominant culture in this country. They're just not. So one of the things that I do is that in order for them to be able to combat this, what we're calling environmental racism, is that I make sure they have an understanding of the tools and methodologies that are used now to actually create some of these contaminants when it comes down to indoor air pollution. So we do a lot of renewable energy training and indoor air quality training workshops, so they know that when they're partnering with other engineers like myself or going out with government officials, when they're speaking a certain language, when they're talking about parts per million, they have an understanding what that means and how it connects back to what happens on a local ground. Another great thing what I do, which is why I'm glad here in Citrus, is that we've been able to work with researchers like Greg here and actually work with the tribe and give them some other information tools so they themselves can start collecting real-time information on pollutants at hand. So in case, if I will, in summary, my work is about giving them the information and the tools they need to go out and assess their own current situation now and actually go out and make arguments based off of defensible data that's inclusive of their own cultural values and also inclusive of some of the values that exist out here. Because if you try to fight, as the tribes have already learned, if you try to fight this fight and try to talk about culture alone, it doesn't work. You have to be able to speak the language of a dominant culture and, moreover, utilize the tools of a dominant culture to compose these kind of arguments. And I think that's one of the reasons why the tribe I've been working with has been so happy, is that we've been able to take the engineering knowledge production approaches we've utilized here and allow them, if you will, to hack it, if you will, so they can produce a design that comes from a dominant discourse of what's come here at Berkeley. It's kind of hard to argue with a sustainable building design when it's designed by some of the crazy engineers at Berkeley. I mean, it's hard for anybody to criticize their design because they can be like, look, we followed the knowledge production metrics that's in the literature and the discourse. Just because we embedded our culture in there doesn't take it away from its merits. So that's what I really try to do, make sure they've got the information and they've got the tools so they can assess on their own, gather information on their own, and utilize the dominant discourses, knowledge production methods, and data manipulation methods to make their own claims. I think that's I think the biggest benefit of the work that I've done so far.
Great. Asha or JR?
I'm not, and I'll just, since we're talking about inclusion, I'm not exactly sure how I can be included in this conversation because I don't understand completely what you mean by environmental racism. I think of not as youth radio, I think of as just Asha on campus, of our campus as an environment, and we were having an issue with some women who didn't perform female, who were of color, who would be, targeted by public safety, who would go, or maybe we didn't resolve the issue. We're working on the issue, not to throw my school under the bus. But that's what I think about. I think about the environments in which racism occurs, but I'm not sure if you mean by environmental racism, you mean the environment.
Talking the eco-technological downside of development.
So a project that comes to mind that makes me think of that, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name. There is a group of young people who are doing, they're high school age students working with their professor, talking about places where air quality pollutants. When we were first starting out, we were just looking at a lot of different projects, and they found out one of the most areas of air pollution was in a couple of schools. It was worse in certain other areas. And I think that finding more projects that are, I'm new to this field in this industry of looking at how science interacts with the community and how that interacts with race. And I'm seeing more projects come out, and I think just having more projects coming out is bringing the issue to a forefront, and maybe that's kind of a go-to answer. But I think that it's also important for people who are in my demographic of 20s and under 20s to be included in that conversation and know that when they go online and they're watching television, don't just jump to MTV. Not saying that they all do, but I think that more information like that needs to be pushed at young people so that when I'm presenting, I have more of a canon or more of an idea of what's going on, because a lot of the information presented to us ignores that.
Okay, great. Any thoughts, JR?
I'm kind of like Asha. I don't know if you're talking about like water, air quality, and soil, or you're talking about the toxic environment at KPFA.
I say both. I think it's both.
No?
I think it would be both.
Well, then I'll address it from the KPFA aspect.
Okay.
KPFA is seen as a progressive, liberal station. For you that don't know, it's 94.1 FM. The real honest to God truth of what's really happening, though, is they're progressive somewhat on the microphone and racist as hell when the microphones go off. So, how do I deal with it? I deal with it first by not leaving. And just staying to fight. That's first. Second off, basically, like we were talking about the issue of inclusion, I have to armor myself to deal with the issues and not be able to take the baggage home with me. Lead a fight right there. That's how I deal with it. And then third off, and I think the most effective way in dealing with it is organizing against it. And for people that listen to my form of journalism, I'm definitely in the arena of being an advocacy journalist. After every show, I'm trying to tell you, you can call this person, get involved with that. You can get involved with this campaign over here, because I believe that media is not a spectator sport. It should be something that we work together on, and if you listening to me and you have no way to speak back to me, at least I can send you somewhere where we can have a discussion like we did with this. Cecil was on my show, and two women that were talking to me earlier came and gave me their perspective. So I deal with it like that. I deal with it like, as many of you guys who've been here all day, I look at it as a war, and I see myself as a soldier. And, I got to be relentless, because white supremacy, capitalism, imperialism, chauvinism, cultural chauvinism, all of that is relentless. Day in, day out, they own us. And that's why my type of journalism is just like that. I'm learning honestly from them, and we just fighting them with their own tools.
Okay, I want to open it up to any questions, any opportunities to build. We'll start with Andre.
I just wanted to give a comment. I guess I'm impressed by everybody's good work that they're doing in the community, and I appreciate this panel discussion. And I don't know, I just feel like you can't have no discussion about economics and about inclusion without economics. And you can't talk about economics without talking about poverty. How the brother talked about, the poverty levels here, and we're not at that level. We can't be at that level, and we always got to hack, because hacking is survival anyway. The brother wouldn't have gotten an award if he didn't hack, tonight. So we wouldn't have any technology. There's a saying that in New York, Manhattan keeps on making it, Brooklyn keeps on taking it, and on this coast, it's Oakland keeps on making it, and Wood keeps on taking, Hollywood keeps on taking it, and you can look at it all kinds of ways. You know what I mean? When I say Wood, it's just like, they take it and it's manipulated, and then we have to suck it up because we can't afford to get the newest or the latest or the education or whatever, and we got to take the dirt and create something technical that fits for us, that works for us, and that's always going to be, because it's always a method of survival. But until those things are addressed and we're on a level playing field all the way around. You know, I mean, we're dealing with the FCC. You know, that's the #1 alphabet boy. You know, it's on the back of everybody's phone. It's on everything technical. The back of your TV. They're the main ones, and you can't talk about that without talking about sustainability and environmentalism, because all this technical stuff goes back in the garbage in the earth, and we're just hurting the planet. And it's almost like a suicidal mental disorder for us to continually consume and put these technological garbages back in the trash. And in Africa, they're taking it out the trash and trying to make something out of it so they can communicate. Right. You know, so we gotta really slow down. You know, we're going real fast. This technological wizardry, but we don't even know how to do the software and dealing with each other socially, like shake a hand, looking at each other in the eye, because we're hopping on the BART going like this, right. You know, and not seeing each other and bumping each other and getting a fight, you know, like right. Over your phone, you know. Mm-hmm. So it's just like, you know, the progress has to have a process, you know, it has to have more of a human process.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, sister up here. Yeah, tell me your name. Oh, sorry, with the hat on. Tracy. Okay.
Mine's Tracy, and I have a question for the brother who is the engineer.
Yep.
I'm interested in, when we're talking about inclusion, we seem to start from a space of assuming that everybody has access to things like electricity, for example. So we talk about the digital divide and we talk about access to the internet and blah, blah, blah. But if you ain't got no electricity, all of that's irrelevant. Now, when you look at places that are more rural areas, like many parts of Africa, which is one of the main places that I'm concerned about, you see a adoption of digital technology mostly through like handhelds. A lot of people have cell phones and, you know, cellular technology connecting through satellite internet connections, et cetera. How are you, through your work, working in concert with organizations that are providing support for infrastructure so that people can be brought to a point that they're able to access other types of technology, that base level of infrastructure support?
So the short answer is yes. With the work that we're doing, we are, even though the tribes do have some sort of disdain for some of the federal agencies, we are able to find partners within the federal government, particularly our EPA Region 9 office, to help us do a lot of this work. UC Berkeley Citrus, the building that you're in now, the Center for Information Technology and Research in the Interest of Society, has been one of our major supporters of being able to help us identify technologies that can actually fit and work within this community's framework for sustainability. Everything from indoor air quality to looking at telehealth, and I hope electric vehicles. So the short answer is yes, but moreover to this point, it really comes, I think you're trying to get as, how can these communities pursue their own sustainable development or pursue their own things of self-sufficiency? And I think it's rather difficult because when you look at how these technologies are being designed or how electricity is being designed, the people that are designing it, to your point, they have their own social and cultural norms in there. They've designed these things for a certain purpose to meet a certain goal. And sometimes you can't take a design that you've made in Alabama and transport it over to California, let alone to transport over to Africa. So that's why I spend a lot of work with the tribal community itself to help them develop the capacity, the adaptive capacity, if you will, to take the basic technology that exists now, whether it is new media. We have an architect that's working on the new media side for building design, but whether it's new media, whether it's energy, to modify it on their own so they don't necessarily need us here at Berkeley to do that work. So I think ultimately that's where I'm moving towards, so that this tribal community, they don't have to partner with outside groups if they don't want to, but when they do partner, we're treated as equal partners, as equal co-designers and researchers. So I hope that answers your question, ma'am. Okay.
We had a couple of questions up. I want to, pardon, right here in the blue. Yes, you. I know, I'm trying to spread around. A couple of questions earlier.
Hi. I was here from the morning and I feel a little bit uncomfortable because when I first heard about inclusion, I think it's about relating with some special needs and more minority issue, but it's quite racial in here. I'm a developer of apps for kids with special needs, so our what it is, sensitivity for minority is really high. So when we started to develop an app, we want to get access for all kids. Our app is actually target for from 18 months old of cognitive age. When we started that, we got an illustration set from a Korean illustrator, and it has all the same skin color because there is no racial issue in Korea. So the skin color is in between Asian and Korean kids. So some of our teams pointed that issue because we know there are some African American or Latin kids in our kids' classroom, so we want to put some of brown colored boy on the set, and we have a guiding hands that has the same color with my skin color, but we just thought about the option: can we change the skin color? Depends on the player's preference or something, but when we launched that app, we found out nobody cares about that because it's for the kids and it's for the iPad. There is really what it is. The majority is it's somewhere else, and nobody cares about those kind of detail. And there is no expectation about various type of skin color or some what it is.
Can I ask, wait,
role model.
Can I ask who doesn't have expectations? The children?
Parents.
The parents don't have
Yes,
expectations.
because we are targeting really young kids with special needs. Many of them has developmental delay, so they can't express themselves that well. So that's why this project was that unique.
Right.
So we usually expect to hear about role model from parents and teachers about how the model inside of the application described. But nobody cares about that. But we really wanted to care. So how because some number of population here has a different color, and I'm from Asia. But nobody describe about that issue in kids app market. But they will grow inside of that what it is model, and they will have something in their mind, right? So I just wonder when I really wanted to learn what will be what it is best practice in here, and if you are dealing with a really what it is minority group, they usually doesn't care about the minority inside of that minority. So in example, for the kids with special needs, nobody think what it is try to put some racial issue inside of that because there are some more what it is more severe issue in there. But I believe if somebody care and somebody show the standard, it will be really easy to follow, and it will give some good model for kids who will use them. So where can I get that?
Yeah, I think we get the gist.
Can I just respond to that really quickly? I think your point is really well taken, that even if it seems like the kids aren't interested or the parents don't care that there's only one skin type, that in fact over time that will have an impact, and that shapes ideology and changes people's minds about what it means to be identified with the figure online. I think those of the people in the audience who have children or who have young children know there are a lot of online games and worlds that these children can now operate in, even at a very young age. And I know one of them that's called Pop Tropica, and you can go into this world and you can change your skin color as an accessory. And this is one of hundreds of artificial worlds in which you can go, well, hundreds, at least, yeah, hundreds of artificial worlds where you can go in and change your skin color. And so I think that it's something that we do need to talk about critically, because on the one hand, the artificial world is typically a space of fantasy where you go to play, and in that play space, the idea of using skin color as an accessory like a hat or shoes is something that I find really problematic. But it doesn't really call out for best practices. In other words, if you choose a skin color in that world, you have to keep it in that world forever. That would be an interesting question. How do you temporalize skin color in your existence in a given world? Maybe you don't get to give it up when you're tired of it, the way real world works. I mean, how do you think about that for best practices for game design? I'm really thinking about critically about game
actually
design.
what we
But then in terms of what you're working on, I think there should be a question about best practices, that there should be, when you're not talking about fantasy worlds where we can critique them, but you're talking about actually educational spaces for children, then I think that there should be a best practices element in there, and that one should think very carefully about offering people variety and allowing them to make choices in that space, not as a kind of game, but rather as a site for identification and potential identifications with the characters. Because what's obvious, and we know this, is that children identify deeply with gaming characters. And that is something I think we're going to be seeing writing about more and more and more as that generation hits adulthood. Or they already have hit adulthood, but
Yep.
you know,
I
as they-
just want
Any other panelists want to chime in? I think when I first got on Second Life, the default was white or Asian. I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah.
And I think a best practices would be definitely to move beyond something like that.
Oh, yeah.
So what I'm discussing about is one of our app
We
is
kind of have to move on because we have another panel, but I think we'll have Ryan finish up, and then we'll make time for DJ Spooky in the performance.
Ooh, I get the last word. Well, I got to make this profound.
You can do it.
Well, I think what I love about this panel is that it brings us this issue about why is inclusion actually needed. Whether we're looking at inclusion of religion, inclusion of skin color, or inclusion of different knowledge production practices. I mean, I think inclusion is really key because it goes back to this point of coming down to knowledge. I keep going back to my thing about engineering knowledge production. That knowledge and data is key. That's being able to communicate information to different people, different groups is a very nice form of power. But who is the ones that are actually producing this knowledge? Who is actually controlling the knowledge manipulation and in knowledge transfer is very key. And if we want to actually continue to be successful in this country and around the world, we actually need to be able to form these different networks like we're doing here to actually do this knowledge production and do this actual transfer of information. So I'm glad this topic of inclusion is actually here, but I sometimes wonder, I'm looking back at locating the daily practice of inclusion. Inclusion is not really done here, at least in the College of Engineering. It's inclusion coming down to, if everyone's following the same basic script here, there may be different flavors of it, but we're all operating from the same knowledge base and systems of cultural norms. How do I take the cultural norms that you have in your work and combine it into work that we're doing here in engineering? I truly don't know it's possible because we don't have the avenues right now set up, the epistemological avenues, the actual discourse avenues set up for us to do that. That's something I think we need to work on. But if we're not taking into account all the different at least four different knowledge bases on this table, I don't know if we're really making a difference.
Interesting. Okay, please go ahead, Caesar. Yeah.
But I'd like to bring
Round
it
us
back
out.
to this question of literacy and oral culture. And I think J.R. seems to have gotten a little, I'm wondering what he's thinking now. He hasn't said anything for a while. You know, if you think about it, let's be really honest. The whole internet thing is based on literate technology. You got a file. Show me a file. Isn't that literacy? You got a superhighway. What are the other metaphors that are mapped from literacy onto the internet? What are they? I said file cabinet,
search,
desktop. What's some more? Come on, class. More desktop, file cabinet,
Folder.
highway, office. They're all from the literate world. They're not like the drum, okay?
Or the
Beating
bureaucratic.
drum, or what else is acoustic? We live in an acoustic world, first of all. And you got to deal with the fact that it is racist. And what people do when they get on the internet is that they pass for black. Hello? They pass for black. Like all of our culture, it's getting more and more and more like the Roman Empire used to be. Toynbee, who wrote The Rise and Fall of the Empire, Roman Empire, said there were so many slaves in the Roman Empire that the people, it looked like the slaves ran the country. You could almost say that about America. You could almost say that about America. The real deal is that people fake being black. Why? Because black is, can I say something in French?
Sure.
Black is the shit. Excusez-moi. I say something in French. You are bullshitting yourself. It is really about that. And we have to be serious because otherwise we just leave. And I'm sitting there thinking, damn, all that year I spent thinking about this is going to slip away. Because all I wanted to say is that oral tradition is everywhere in us. And the fact that African Americans brought it from Africa befuddles all of us because you can't shake it. You can't get away from it. You can tweak it and make it look like it's something new, but it's always there. Okay, here, I'll say one thing and I'll finish with it. This is like Uncle Remus. Everybody know about Uncle Remus. You know about the old man who told the stories to the little white boy, and he told the stories about the Br'er Rabbit, right? Mm-hmm. And the whole thing about Br'er Rabbit and all that was the boy wanted to find out, Uncle Remus, did they ever catch Br'er Rabbit? You know what he said? No, they never did catch Br'er Rabbit. And what's more, they never will. And you know why? Brother Rabbit is the African in all of us, the elusive parts you cannot capture. Why? Because all the other animals, Br'er Fox, Br'er Bear, they were they were eating other animals. They are carnivorous, a carnivore. What is Br'er Rabbit? Anybody who's been in the South and seen a rabbit, what do they eat? Vegetables. They're herbivores, right? They don't eat the same thing. So when they have a big party, they say, Br'er Rabbit, come to the party. Everybody going to get together. All the animals in the settlement are going to get together, and we're going to be all like one. Br'er Rabbit didn't show up, okay? They say, we only want you to come to the party and bring that good sauce you make. But when they came to the party, they found out Br'er Rabbit left a little note saying the sauce that you like so much is on the third plate. He didn't show up. Why didn't he show up? Right, he doesn't want to be eaten. Because the relationship between the herbivores, that is the people who eat plants, to the people who eat meat is a relationship between freedom and slavery. For the Africans, seeing through the folk tales, what it meant, slavery was just eating other people. Freedom was being able to have a diet based on nature. And they conceived that, and they lived by it, they thought about it, and they did not need literacy. So I thought what we would come to today would be thinking about those problems, how the folk people who bequeathed to us so much beautiful things did not have reading and writing. The white man kept that from them for 400 years. He put on a piece of paper he could buy anyone in this room who was not from England on a piece of paper. So we got to deal with that, you know, and now we're throwing the piece of paper out. In my own lifetime, I'm a writer. I write books, right? But the bookstores are closed. Why? When they found out that black people could accomplish the thing that they had held over them, then they got rid of it. It's not important anymore. But now the internet and the things that people are doing in the digital world may be like Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson couldn't fight a white man. When they found out he could, he beat all the white men he could find, right? So what happens if all these black people, with the leisure they got and the brains and the intelligence, didn't even go to Cal, and yet came up with things that would like make millions of dollars? I never knew a black man could make $1 million without going to college. But the rappers showed that you can make $200 million without going to college. All right? So we all should pay attention to these facts and not get too, tangent. That's a hip word from the 40s. Don't go too tangent. Don't go tangent. Stay on the main thing. And the main thing is we are coming from Brother Rabbit. We are Brother Rabbit. We are not meat eaters. Okay? So, anyway, thank you.
Thank you. We'll have more swinging and flowing and with DJ Spooky. And so take some time and refresh yourselves.
All right, thank you.